pursuit of Azerbaijani gas ahead of all of their nice, fine words about human rights, democracy, rule of law that we hear. Nagorno-Karabakh, they never heard of it. They don't know. They don't take that into account. That exposes their hypocrisy in a way in which their support for genocide in Gaza exposes their hypocrisy. We see many of the same similarities in the situation in Azerbaijan. And this denial, perpetuated by organisations like the European Union, causes enormous hurt and suffering to the victims and their descendants, and does create a cycle, if you like, of injustice and impunity. So that's the kind of background to why we're here today. I mean, recognition of the Armenian genocide is not only important to prevent future crimes against ethnic Armenians, but for all potential crimes against humanity, because we know there are many cases of genocide, for example, before the ICJ at the moment. We think it's important that they shouldn't be looked on individually. They should be seen as part of a broader catalogue of human rights violations. So the acknowledgement of the case of Armenian genocide is significant. We believe that it's obviously very important for the surviving victims who are scattered across the globe. In their homeland now in eastern Turkey, Armenian churches mark some of the only proof that the Armenian populations, who so recently were the major native population, along with Greeks and Assyrian populations who were also the victims of the genocide. Little over 70,000 Armenians now officially remain in Turkey today. So these are the issues that we're discussing. Clearly, of course, Nagorno-Karabakh is going to feature strongly. For those displaced there, I think the words of Mark Twain are relevant when he says history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And that's definitely true for Nagorno-Karabakh, who just, what happened there a little more than 6 months ago now, with precious little of a headline, is almost incomprehensible. It was obviously in some ways taken over by the genocide in Gaza, but still, even before that, it was not given the attention that it should have in light of the heinous crimes that were perpetuated there. So that's why we're here. The Armenian genocide is a stark reminder of the consequences of silence, denial and impunity. Silence, denial and impunity, which continues to this day. For too long, the voices of the victims have been suppressed, their pain ignored, their stories marginalised. But today, we're here to begin to break that silence and to shine a light on these crimes against humanity. So I'm really delighted to be here from that point of view, to welcome you all here as we assemble to listen to the historical evidence and expert testimony of both the Armenian genocide and the events leading up to the current situation for the ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. So from that point of view, I'm absolutely delighted to open the proceedings today. And for me, without further ado, we are delighted that we have with us at the event the honour of welcoming Armeni Mkhitaryan, who is representing the mission of Armenia to the European Union. The presence of the embassy for us really underscores the importance of international genocide recognition. So please have a very warm welcome to our esteemed representative, Armeni. So.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Ms. Claire Daly, dear speakers, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Mr. Tigran Balayan, Head of Mission to the European Union, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude to all the organizers of this conference, and especially to Ms. Daly for hosting this event, once again raising awareness about the heinous crimes that happened in 1915. This year, on April 24, the world will commemorate the 109th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, the systematic and intentional murder of 1.5 million Armenians, doubled with the displacement of hundreds of thousands more by Ottoman Empire from 1915 to 1923. On this day, everyone who is willing to stand against injustice comes together to honor the victims who perished during this atrocity. The facts of the genocide are horrific and undebatable, as well as undisputed by a broad range of legal experts and eyewitnesses. They were recorded by many diplomats and missionaries serving in the Ottoman Empire at the time, who bore witness in official cables to the annihilation of the Armenian population, a crime that at the time had no name. On May 24, 1915, the Entente Cordiale condemned the massacres of Armenians using for the first time the term crimes against humanity. And only in 1944, the term genocide was coined by Raphael Lemkin. By defining this term, Professor Lemkin sought to describe the systematic murder of the Jewish population of Europe, as well as the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. Today, several dozen countries have recognized the events of 1915 as genocide in terms stipulated through the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. This very temple of democracy, the European Parliament, was among the first multinational institutions to recognize the Armenian genocide by adopting a relevant resolution on a political solution to the Armenian question of June 18, 1987, thus paving the way for others to do the same. The resolution asked for the acknowledgement of the Armenian genocide of 1915 to 1917, thereby enabling a political dialogue to be established between Turkey and the representatives of the Armenian people. Dear colleagues, one would think that crimes of this colossal magnitude are impossible in the 21st century, that our civilization will not tolerate xenophobic policies that permeated the political ideology and shaped the genocidal mindset of the Ottoman leadership. Alas, painful examples such as the case of Rwanda in 1994, Yazidi genocide in 2014, and mass atrocities of different ethnic minorities all over the world kept taking place. In 2023, the Armenians of the region were once again forced out of their ancestral homeland under the threat of sharing the same tragic fate of their compatriots over a century ago. The United Nations Framework for Atrocity Crimes analysis defines risk factors that significantly escalate the possibility of mass atrocities against a specific ethnic group. In the case of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians, those factors were visible with the naked eye, as attested by the relevant decision of the International Court of Justice. They persisted right to the point when the government of Azerbaijan has in effect ethnically cleansed Nagorno-Karabakh, and this happened right in front of our eyes. This terrible situation is a testament to one eternal truth. When the crime is committed, but impunity persists, it is doomed to be repeated. If we do not firmly reject Armenophobia that is relentlessly perpetuated by the Azerbaijani propaganda machine, if we do not fight for Armenia's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence, who knows if there ever will be another representative of Armenia standing here in front of you. Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh should have a right to return to their ancestral land under international guarantees and presence, according to the ICJ legally binding decisions. This time justice should prevail, and the perpetrators of the crime should be punished. The European Union has all the relevant tools in its toolbox to address the issue and to hold accountable the ones who are guilty. The EU should make use of it to its fullest extent, so as not to leave a space for Azerbaijan to continue its warmongering and hateful policies against Armenia. So let me conclude with once again thanking you for the invitation to participate on this very important discussion, and I wish you for a fruitful and productive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it is great to have the mission present here, and I think that was a really fitting opening. So the formalities are over, and I am given the task of introducing our first speaker, who is Baruvir Sevag Demirjan. Not great Armenian there, but I did my best. It's been a long week, that's all I'll say. But Baruvir really has been the passion and the main organizer behind this event. Without him, we wouldn't be assembled here tonight. And he has been the one who is driving for some time now the idea that the Nagorno-Karabakh situation would not be forgotten. As a Syrian Armenian displaced in the Syrian war, he repatriated to Armenia, developed an interest in the role of the Armenian diaspora in national affairs, and has been a young European ambassador in Armenia throughout much of the events in Nagorno-Karabakh. So I have to say his energy and devotion to this event and to pursuing the matter has been really inspirational. So he's a member of the Armenian Genocide, or Armenian General Benevolent Union, and the Armenian Democratic Liberal Party. So I'm going to hand over the chairing of the event to Baruir after he finishes speaking. So give him a very warm welcome.
So first of all, I want to thank you for the kind words. And before I started, I want to thank everyone as well who helped organize this event, everyone here present as well, everyone present who helped me or helped us organize this event, and everyone from Armenia and the diaspora who as well worked tireless all day, every day to make this happen. Before I start my speech, I want to take a second to thank Claire personally and on behalf of the organization as well. Claire's unwavering dedication to human rights and justice has been instrumental in bringing us together. Her impact extends far beyond this gathering. Claire has consistently lent her voice to the Armenian cause when few others would, becoming a beacon of advocacy. It is through her generous support that we stand here united today, commemorating and advocating for justice, not only for the genocide, but also for Nagorno-Karabakh. On behalf of Ramgavar Azadagan Gusakchuchun, the organization, and also on my behalf personally, I extend my deepest gratitude to Claire for her tireless efforts on behalf of Armenians everywhere. I want to say this before you leave, because we are very thankful. So yeah, if you can give a round of applause for her as well.
I'll wait for your speech.
Perfect. So, in the summer of 1915, accounts, few and scanty at first, but increasing in volume later, began to find their way out of Asiatic Turkey as to the events that were happening there. These accounts describe what seemed to be an effort to exterminate the whole nation of Armenians, without distinction of age or sex, to be whose misfortune it was to be the subjects of a government devoid of scruples and of pity. And the policy they disclosed was one without precedent, even in the blood-stained annals of the East. These are the exact words by which Viscount James Bryce, British politician, diplomat, and historian, characterizes the horrific occurrences within the Ottoman Empire. In the documentary record of the massacres published by the British government in 1916, known as the Blue Book. Henry Morgenthau, American ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, appearing in his book of memoirs covering the time of his tenure as official envoy to Constantinople, from 1913 to 1916, wrote, "When the Turkish authorities gave the orders for the deportation of ethnic Armenians, they were merely giving the death warrant to a whole race. They understood this well, and in their conversation with me, they made no particular attempt to conceal this act." The president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, like many other Turkish state functionaries before him, has emphatically declared that the accusations against Turkey of having perpetrated the crime of genocide of Armenians are totally false, unfounded, and unwarranted, and that all allegations in respect to the Armenian genocide are lies. We stand here today to honor the truths that Viscount James Bryce, Ambassador Harry Morgenthau, and large number of internationally acknowledged researchers and historians have for 109 years documented, showing the intent of the destruction of the Armenian race. These historians are not vicious liars, nor are they spiteful sworn enemies of the Turks. They're simply seekers of truth. The fact of the matter is that, commencing on April 24, 1915, the Turkish authorities carried out the premeditated and brutal scheme to annihilate the Armenian people. The extent of this unprecedented planning of this ethnic cleansing was surpassed only by the ruthlessness of the exceedingly inhumane methods used to carry out these barbaric acts. The tragic consequence of this plan and action was that by 1923, more than 1.5 million Armenian men, women, and children were slaughtered in one of the cruelest acts in human history. An entire nation of people was uprooted from its ancestral lands of historic and traditional habitat. The remaining survivors were desperate deportees who for many decades suffered with the physical and psychological consequences of this displacement. The word genocide was coined in 1943 by Raphael Lemkin, a Polish lawyer of Jewish descent who studied the massacre of Armenians in depth and campaigned in the League of Nations to ban what he called barbarity and vandalism. The specific legal definition of genocide is found in the 1948 United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the crime of genocide. Article 2 of this convention defines genocide as any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, such as A, killing members of the group, B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. This definition accounts for any one of the above crimes being categorized as genocide. The Armenians were subjected to all of these crimes during the period of 1915 to 1923. Records of these crimes within the genocide of Armenians abundantly exist in the archives of all countries, of nearly all influential countries of the world. It would, therefore, best serve in the interests of all leaders, and for that matter, all people, to have the courage and resolve to acknowledge this history. The leaders of the world should realize that denial of the genocide is equivalent to the continuation of this genocide. By denying those whose ancestors were displaced and murdered, justice. Genocide recognition can lead the way for reconciliation. Reconciliation would undoubtedly be beneficial to both the Armenian population and the population in modern-day Turkey. An end to all hostilities is desired by all self-respecting people. But in order to achieve reconciliation, it is absolutely essential that the genocide is acknowledged by all peoples across the globe, including Turkey. This should include remorse and guarantees that all measures be in place to prevent that this grievous act will never be repeated to any people, anywhere, including Nagorno-Karabakh. It should be categorically emphasized that Armenians bear absolutely no ill will, malice, or animosity towards the Turkish people, per se. We firmly believe that the whole of mankind should endeavor to achieve peaceful, lasting, and harmonious coexistence. We fully believe that all individual and collective rights are respected, all suffered injustices are thoroughly compensated, and all unresolved grievances are exhaustively identified. The Armenian genocide is a historical event which requires acknowledgement, understanding, and agreement universally in order to honor the victims of the tragic chapter in history. Let no one blame, censor, or reprimand Armenians for their solemn and continued venture of seeking the ultimate justice. Acknowledgement of this event, which claimed over 1.5 million lives and which its legacy continues to this day. Thank you for your attention. Yeah, so I'll continue with hosting the event and welcoming our speakers. So next, I want to introduce Dr. Edita Gzoyan. It is my pleasure to introduce her, who joins us online as the director of the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute Foundation. We were fortunate enough to have her today to speak on the history of the Armenian genocide. More specifically, the marking of 109 years of it. That's how long it has been. Dr. Edita Gzoyan is a leading researcher at the Department of the Study of the Oppression of the Armenians of Artsakh and Nakhichevan and Azerbaijan at the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute Foundation. Her main fields of research are legal and historical aspects of the Armenian genocide and the Artsakh issue, the history of the First Armenian Republic, and scientometrics. Dr. Gzoyan has published dozens of articles in national and international journals and authored and co-authored 3 books. We are honored to have her today speak to us online. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Dr. Edita Gzoyan.
Thank you, so much, Farud, for this introduction. And thank you, Madame Daly, for organizing this important event, which is important from historical and also from modern nowadays for Armenia, because unfortunately 109 years have passed since the Armenian genocide, but still we are facing the denial and non-recognition of the Armenian genocide. And moreover, Armenian people are unfortunately facing new genocides and new genocidal threats. I will now share my screen. And okay. So I have put some photos on the cover page of my presentation, which unfortunately for us, genocide scholars are so familiar, not only from history, but also nowadays. You can see the deportation routes from the Armenian genocide and also what had befell Artsakh in 2023. Photos that are quite similar to each other. I will briefly go through the stages of the Armenian genocide because our previous speakers had already touched the issue, but because the photos which are here, they will be repeated at the end of my presentation. That's why it's important to speak about them once again. So for the Armenian genocide scholars, those who are researching the Armenian genocide issue, like the Armenian genocide is divided into several phases. And the first one was the elimination of Armenian men through conscripting them into the army or killing them right away before or at the beginning of deportation. The next stage of the Armenian genocide was the deportation of more than 1 million Armenians from their historical indigenous lands. And during those deportation marches, the caravans, which consist mainly of women and children, Armenians were killed. They were died from starvation, from thirst, from exhaustion, from humiliation. But along those acts, Armenians were also forcibly assimilated during the genocide. So young children and also young women were forcibly transferred to the enemy group and incorporated, assimilated, Turkified, Islamized, and so on and so forth. So you can see here some photos of Armenian women who were Islamized, and you can see the marks, those tattoos on their faces, which bear the witness of what they passed through. Why it's important to stress this assimilation process as well? To understand the genocide, because genocide is not only about the physical destruction, but it's about the destruction of the identity. And assimilation is a method through which the destruction of the community can be achieved. Now I want to turn to some legal aspects of the Armenian genocide because it's very important. Unfortunately, now we are facing the non-recognition and the denial of the Armenian genocide. But actually, during the genocide and right after that, the Armenian genocide was acknowledged by the world, and it was acknowledged by Turkey itself. So May 24, 1915 declaration, and our colleague has briefly dwelt upon this declaration. I cannot exaggerate the importance of this declaration in several ways. And you can see how Britain, France, and Russia, they issued a joint declaration like right at the beginning of the Armenian genocide, mentioning how the Armenians were being massacred in the Ottoman Empire and how the Turkish authorities were coordinating and organizing those massacres, how the Armenians were imprisoned and how they were violated, and how Armenian peaceful population was pressured. And I have highlighted the part that, according to me, is the, like, not only me, but the scholars, is the most important part, that speaks about the new crimes of Turkey against humanity and civilization. And our previous speaker was right in that this is the first time that the concept crimes against humanity was used with regard to the Armenian massacres and deportations. And unfortunately, up until the end of World War II and the Nuremberg Charter, this crimes against humanity concept remained vague and without any explanation and understanding. So what the Allied government did, they publicly announced that Turkey that they will hold personally responsible all the authors of the massacres and deportations of the Armenians and the agents who were implicit in such massacres. But this is not the only legal implication we have with regard to the crimes against humanity used in the Armenian context. In 1919, during the Paris Peace Conference, the Commission on the Responsibility of the Authors of War and the Enforcement of Penalties was formed. And the main goal of this commission was to determine the authors of World War I and impose penalties on those who had committed war crimes. So in today's terms, this was the first war crime commission that was established. And among the other issues, the commission was also dealing with the massacres and deportations of Armenians and bringing into justice the main criminals who were responsible for massacring and deporting the Armenians. And being the first international body of its kind, the commission comprised 2 representatives from each of the 5 great powers: Great Britain, France, Italy, the United States, and Japan, and also 1 representative from the small states who were most affected by the war: Belgium, Greece, Poland, Romania, and Serbia. And Armenian case was the only case which was outside of these countries and was considered by this war commission. And now you can see the crimes, the findings of this commission regarding the crimes that were perpetrated against the Armenians. And there were 3 actually, and I am quoting: murders, massacres, systematic terrorism. This referred to the massacres of Armenians carried out by the Turks, which took place in Turkish provinces. More than 200,000 victims were massacred, burned alive, and they were drowned in the rivers. The second crime, it's about the deception of women and young girls. And it's mentioned that many Armenian women, young girls, and children were shut up in harems. They were Islamized. So this is the second crime mentioned by this commission. And the third one, deportation of citizens. And it's written that more than 1 million Armenians were deported to Mesopotamia, Syria, where many died of malnutrition, starvation, and diseases. So these were the findings of the commission. The 3 crimes that were perpetrated during the Armenian genocide, and actually these 3 crimes very well describe all the crimes that were perpetrated against the Armenians during the Armenian genocide. One more important thing was that this War Crime Commission was offering for the first time in international criminal law to establish an international criminal tribunal, and also to try the perpetrators of Armenian massacres and deportation. And in order to avoid this decision of this War Crime Commission, the Turkish authorities, they decided to implement their own justice. So the Armenian Nuremberg, Constantinople, or Istanbul trials. So the Turkish government, they have established their own national courts, which are like more known as court martials or Istanbul trials. It started in 1918, and what is interesting that a motion to start a trial against the Ottoman ministers was submitted to the Ottoman parliament, and it referred to the supremacy of law and humanity. So as we can see here again, there is a referral to humanity and the loss of humanity. And these military courts were established on December 1918 by the Ottoman Sultan's decree, and the trial was based on the Ottoman criminal law. And the main charges against the Turkish authorities were deportation and murder of Armenians, and also illegal personal enrichment and the Turkey's entry into the World War I. What is important also for these trials, the findings, and I have put here some quotes which from the legal point are very important, and also how the courts back then in 1919, they understood the concept of genocide, and the wording used by this court actually describe what we have now with regard to the definition of the genocide. So I'm reading now, quoting, there was an intent to kill the Armenians. So this intent part is very much important in terms of the concept and the crime of genocide. The next finding, the deportations and murders were aimed at finally providing a radical solution to the Armenian question. So the Turkish court has found that those deportations were actually aimed to bring a final solution to the Armenian question in the Ottoman Empire. Another important thing was that the crimes were committed regularly and they were organized. So the court found that there were no sporadic events, no sporadic killings or deportations, but they were regular, intentional, and organized. The murder of an entire nation that was a separate community in the Ottoman Empire, and again referring to the concept of genocide and the Genocide Convention, which refers only to the 4 targeted group. Again, we are dealing here with the wording separate community and the murder of an entire nation. And the last thing which is also important in terms of understanding the genocide, what happened to the Armenians was a deliberate decision taken by the central government, and the atrocities that took place were based on the written and verbal orders. So these are all the findings of the Turkish courts, and they are not only important from the point of view of bringing justice, but also they are very important in understanding the crime of genocide that was perpetrated against the Armenians. Although there was no word genocide by then, but the crime, the underpinnings of the crimes were very well understood by the judges, by the Turkish judges. So about the judgments, the court found the ministers, the Ottoman ministers, guilty of organizing the massacres and deportations of Armenians. Some were found guilty of first-degree murder. This was the highest degree punishment in the Ottoman criminal court, and they were sentenced to death. Others received imprisonment sentences for varying terms, and some provincial officials were sentenced to death and they were executed. But unfortunately, during the Mustafa Kemal nationalistic movement, which coincides with the timing of these Istanbul trials, with his victory, these trials were stopped. And the people who were sentenced to death or were imprisoned, they were freed, and they were even announced as national heroes, and amnesty was adopted against them, and also this amnesty provision was put in the Lausanne Treaty, which was the treaty that ended the World War I between the Ottoman Empire and the Allied powers. And unfortunately, although the justice was so near to the Armenians and to the Armenian case, but in the Lausanne Treaty, there was nothing about the Armenian cause, there was nothing about the Armenian genocide, only about national minorities without any referral to the Armenians. What has happened in Eastern Armenia, what is now the Republic of Armenia, we were another period of silence because in 1920, Armenia became a Soviet state, and in 1922, we become part of the Soviet Union. And unfortunately, during this period, it was absolutely forbidden for Armenians here in Armenia to speak about the Armenian genocide. Even in the homes, people were afraid to speak about the genocide and to raise the issue of genocide. We have a lot of Armenian genocide survivors who repatriated to Soviet Armenia, but then by the decision of Iosif Stalin, who was the head of Communist Party of the Soviet Union, they were sent to Siberia. So people who survived the Armenian genocide were sent to Siberia to witness another round of violence and murder, actually, and unfortunately, there are not few. So what was the reason? Actually, one political and another connected with the nationalistic policy of the Soviet Union. During the Soviet Union, like speaking about the national issues was considered as a sign of nationalism, and it was suppressed. And the second issue was connected with the good relations between the Soviet Union and Turkey. That's why, like Joseph Stalin was forbidding us of speaking about our history and our pain. What has changed on the 50th anniversary of the Armenian genocide? Like Turkey in 1952, it became a member of NATO. So the relations between Soviet Russia and Turkey deteriorated. And the second one, there is a huge demand coming from the Armenians living in Armenia to at least commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. And the Armenian Soviet leader, who was himself the survivor of the Armenian genocide, he started negotiations with Moscow to enable us to build a memorial that is devoted to the victims of the Armenian genocide. So in 1967, it was like on the 50th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, the Armenian Genocide Memorial was established and opened. And now it's a place of pilgrimage for the Armenians living in Armenia and also in diaspora. As Madame Daly has mentioned, April 24 is the date we commemorate the Armenian genocide, a symbolic date, and we are having crowds of people coming to the Armenian genocide to commemorate, to remember the innocent victims, 1.5 million victims of the Armenian genocide. But the Armenian Genocide Memorial is not only about the Armenian genocide. It also bears some witnesses of the current genocide being perpetrated against the Armenians, this time in Artsakh, in Nagorno-Karabakh. And on these photos, you can see graves that are very near to the Armenian Genocide Memorial. These are graves of first freedom fighters who died during the first Artsakh War. And on the next photo, you can see 3 khachkars that are erected on the territory of the Armenian Genocide Memorial, and they are connected with the violence that was perpetrated against the Armenians in Azeri cities of Baku, Sumgait, and Kirovabad, Ganzak. Why they are here, why they are on the territory of the Armenian Genocide Memorial? Because they tell another story of genocide. And when in 1921, by the arbitrary decision of Iosif Stalin, Artsakh was incorporated into Soviet Azerbaijan. And there is this deception that during these 70 years, Armenians and Azeris were living peacefully next to each other. This was actually not the case. Even under the Soviet rule, there was hatred, there was discrimination, and there was Armenophobia against the Armenians, and it burned vividly and violently during the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the Armenians who were living in Azerbaijan were violently forcefully dispelled from Azerbaijan, from the Azerbaijani cities. They were murdered, Armenian women were raped, Armenians were burned alive. And because like the methods of killings were so similar to what were used during the Armenian genocide, like Armenian people, ordinary people, without any interference from the government, they brought these Hajj cars and erected them in the territory of the Armenian genocide as a sign that what has happened to Armenians in Azerbaijan and also in Artsakh and in Nakhichevan, this was the continuation of the Armenian genocide. And with the same intent, these graves of those 5 freedom fighters are on the territory of the Armenian genocide memorial to tell the story of 2 genocides that are so very much interconnected to each other. And also having Turkey backing Azerbaijan during this 1990s period and even before, like there were violence against the Armenians also in 1905, 1918 in the eastern part and also by the Azerbaijan. So having Turkey backing Azerbaijan immediately like raised this issue of genocide in the minds of people. And unfortunately, during this 2020 war, and especially in 2023, like the rhetoric used not only by the Azeri and Turkish officials, but also by ordinary people, we immediately think about the Armenian genocide. Because again, the same methods of killings, the same methods of violence and annihilation towards the Armenians. Now, like the Genocide Memorial Complex tells the story of the past and the present, unfortunately. And the last thing that I want to mention, as I have mentioned during the beginning of my presentation, genocide is not about like physical killings only. Genocide targets the identity of the group. And in this term, cultural genocide, the term cultural genocide is very valid because targeting the cultural heritage of people, it's another way of depriving them of their identity. And here, those photos are from the Armenian genocide and from the Artsakh genocide. They are very similar to each other, like destruction of Armenian churches, monasteries, and other cultural heritage with an aim to show that Armenians are not indigenous in their homeland. And now we are witnessing the same handwriting in the case of Azerbaijan, and even a sophisticated one in terms that not only we are dealing with the destruction, but we are dealing with deteriorating, deleting the history of this cultural heritage, saying that this does not belong to Armenians, but these churches, these monasteries, they belong to other people, like something that is very new for those scholars who are working on the cultural genocide issues, like Raphael Lemkin, when he was speaking about the cultural genocide, he was speaking about like destruction, but he could not imagine that at some day there will be a more sophisticated way of destructing and diluting the cultural heritage of the Armenians. So you remember the first photos that I have shown about the Armenian genocide? These are from Artsakh 2023. Very same images, very similar photos, like deportation, not caravans, but deportation of cars, mothers with their children, children crying, and people not knowing what will happen to them, what will come next after being deprived of their homeland, of their indigenous land, of their culture, and of their identity. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Edita. We're privileged to have you here, as I mentioned earlier, to share your knowledge. There's so much more to learn. There's, for me as well, I can say, being an Armenian from Syria, there's a lot that we learn ourselves about the death marches, about how the Armenians were, they were forced to walk towards the desert in Syria. And there is even a church in Deir Zor, which is a city in Syria, where you can see the bones of the people who died. Unfortunately, if I'm not mistaken, it was damaged, but the church still stands to this day. And the diaspora, the Syrian Armenian community, is one of the first communities that survived the Armenian genocide. And of course, I can see also many other Armenian diasporan people in the audience who I'm sure they have their own story from Lebanon, from France, and many other places. Speaking on this topic that you also mentioned in 1905, there was one question we thought that you would be, know how to the answer for this, which was this question we got, which it is when we talk about the Armenian genocide, why do we only talk about the events from 1915 to 1923 and exclude the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Armenians in the years prior, during 1905, during the Adana massacres, or the Hamidian massacres in 1895? Would you mind sharing us what you think on this question?
Okay. Yes, of course, 1915 was not the start of anti-Armenian violence in the Ottoman Empire. Before that, we have several waves of violence and annihilation of Armenians during the Hamidian massacres and also during the Adana. But like we are speaking about those events as preludes to the genocide, and then we are concentrating on the genocide of 1915-1923 because like there are some differences in intent from the legal point of view. That's why we are somehow differentiating these two events, but they are generally in the frames of anti-Armenian violence and Armenophobia and discrimination against the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire.
Thank you for answering the question. I would like to move on to our next speaker, who's Anita Khachadurova, who will discuss the politics of ethnic cleansing and Nagorno-Karabakh. Anita is a researcher at the Center for the Study of Politics at the Free University of Brussels. Over the last 4 years, she has conducted several ethnographic fieldworks in Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. She is also a member of the Centre de Recherche sur l'Expérience de Guerre and of the Center for Independent Social Research. When we invited Anita to speak today, we were fortunate enough that she just answered immediately that she would be interested to share her knowledge as well. So please join me in extending a warm welcome to Ms. Anita Khachadurova.
Thank you very much for this introduction. And of course, I will start by thanking the organizers of this event, and in particular, Mr. Barur Demircan for extending me this invitation. And of course, to MEP Claire Daly for hosting us. I am honored to be speaking before you today. When preparing this presentation these last few days, I kept wondering what could I tell them that they don't know already, knowing full well that I would be facing many people of Armenian origin and also probably people who are acquainted with the context of South Caucasus politics. And every year, Armenians all over the world and in Armenia proper gather to commemorate the Armenian genocide. They are joined by local politicians, public figures to pledge together, never again. Yet this is the first commemoration, the first after the ethnic cleansing that happened in Nagorno-Karabakh last year. one of the last remaining historically Armenian strongholds, which is now knowing the fate of other such territories from Anatolia to Nakhichevan, where no Armenian remains to this day and today, and the last traces of once vibrant Armenian communities are being erased. Let me start by telling you where I come from intellectually. I'm a researcher in political science with a very micro-sociological approach to war and conflict, which is rather marginal in it's a marginal approach in the conventional international relations scholarship, which predominantly focuses on big power politics. In my work, what I try to do is understand the politics of the ordinary, the everyday of interpersonal relations in small communities and societies torn by war, but also what is generally referred to in post-structuralist scholarship, the biopolitics and necropolitics of state. And I promise you, these are the only obscure academic terms that I will use in this presentation. So in other words, what I mean by that is how states administer and regulate the life and death of individuals and groups that they happen to govern. Over the last 4 years and a half, I've been working on the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and I was lucky enough to conduct several prolonged fieldworks in the region. During that short window of opportunity, which roughly spanned between December 2020 and June 2022, when Nagorno-Karabakh was still accessible to people like me, that is, having an Armenian background, I have conducted more than 100 interviews with Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, with combatants and veterans, politicians, some of whom are unfortunately jailed in Azerbaijan today, civil society members, with men and women of different generations, localities, professions, and socioeconomic background. I have collected their stories, which are stories of recurrent war violence, displacement, loss and trauma, but also stories of resistance, of hope, dreams, claims for rights and dignity, and love for their homeland. When the blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh started in December 2022, and the region became completely isolated and closed to any outside journalist or researcher, I kept writing to the people I knew who were inside, living through the blockade. And I want to bring a few examples of stories that of some of these people, of what they were been going through. So there is a father of two who told me how unbearable was the humiliation he felt each time he looked into his children's eyes and his sons, and I quote him, hungry eyes, looking at him. And so whenever he asked him whether he was hungry, the child would reply, "No, I'm not hungry," not to cause him additional pain as a father. Or another friend who got pregnant, and she went through a difficult pregnancy, but eventually she wasn't able to deliver the child because due to the lack of fuel, she wasn't able to go to the hospital for consultations. So these are only two stories among thousands of similar stories of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians in the blockade. A blockade which was calculated to bring about extreme psychological distress to the population. But the blockade and the eventual military attack of September 19, 2023 were only the culmination of this politics, which I call here the politics of ethnic cleansing. Since the 9 November agreement that put on hold the 44-day war and the deployment in Nagorno-Karabakh of the Russian peacekeeping mission, Azerbaijan put in place targeted practices of terror, which were at the center of its policy of ethnic cleansing against the local Armenian, which of course intended and led to drive them out. Between June and December 2021 alone, when I myself was on the ground, I could record a few of such practices of terror, a few of examples that I will mention here. So there was the killing of a farmer in his tractor by an Azerbaijani sniper in the region of Martakert, while the man himself was accompanied by a Russian peacekeeper. So thus, it was clearly signaling to any Armenian in Nagorno-Karabakh that nowhere was safe for them, including with literally a Russian peacekeeper person there to protect the Armenians, literally with accompanying them. So it is also the execution point blank of two technicians near the town of Shushi that had been sent to perform some pipeline reparations, and again in front of the Russians. There were, of course, the recurrent shootings on frontline villages, causing damage to civilian vehicles, homes, and occasionally wounding people. In one of such cases, in the village I visited, after it had been targeted by the fire, I visited a family, a young family, whose home got damaged by a salvo of bullets, one of which had entered the room where the newborn baby was sleeping. Fortunately, the baby did not get hurt, but you can imagine how these instances of violence were working to create a constant and prevailing atmosphere of terror and increased vulnerability. One had to bear all that in mind when talking about Nagorno-Karabakh reintegration into Azerbaijan, or rights and security of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians in Azerbaijan. There was a clear political issue at stake that was not addressed as such, that of the political rights of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians who had never been fully integrated in Azerbaijan, not during the Soviet Union, where they had an autonomous status, and even less so over the past 30 years, where they evolved as a de facto independent state. So there were several generations being born and growing up not knowing what it is to live in Azerbaijan. How exactly was the integration to take place when Azerbaijan was denying even the fact of the existence of a unit called Nagorno-Karabakh, let alone the identity of the Karabakh Armenians themselves, who were just considered separatists and terrorists and occupiers in official Azerbaijani narratives. Both the media and the decision-making circles in Europe and the US framed the Nagorno-Karabakh problem through the prism of humanitarianism. In other words, there was a consistent denial of political rights of people whose existential struggle it has been from 1918-1920 onwards. And this is a period of intense fighting over borders that took place in the South Caucasus between the three newborn countries, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan, after the collapse of the Russian Empire. The Armenians at that time were already fighting for autonomy in Nagorno-Karabakh. And what means autonomy is basically their physical presence, cultural rights, and the preservation of their heritage. And today we learned of another, unfortunately, another destruction that took place in the town of Shushi of the church of St. John the Baptist that was just razed to the ground by Azerbaijan, a 19th century church. Writing about the violent takeover of the region by Azerbaijan, Tom de Waal, one of the most prominent specialists and long-time observer of the region, wrote, meaning Ilham Aliyev, seized the moment to achieve something Azerbaijan had tried and failed to do in 1918, 1920, and 1991-92, drive out the Armenians and make Karabakh a fully Azerbaijani territory. At the height of Azerbaijani blockade, Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians conducted several massive demonstrations in Stepanakert, with more than 40,000 gathering to claim that their problem was not humanitarian, but political, and that they were ready to discuss these claims with Baku. But again, all the talks in Europe, in the negotiation platforms, were revolving around what corridor to use to alleviate the worsening humanitarian situation created by Azerbaijan's refusal to open the Lachin corridor. On March 19, this year, so exactly 6 months since the Azerbaijani attack that led to the exodus of Karabakh Armenians, during the Nowruz celebration, the Persian New Year holiday, President Ilham Aliyev tweeted a video of him proudly standing dressed in military fatigues in the emptied central square of Stepanakert, Nagorno-Karabakh's capital, in front of the Nowruz fire, and he wrote, "The Nowruz fire is also doing the final cleaning." After the completion of the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh, not a single sanction was imposed on Azerbaijan. Neither the gas deal concluded by EU Commission in July 2022 was revoked. Belarus Lukashenko regime has been under harsh economic sanctions for much less than that. Not only has Ilham Aliyev not been sanctioned for the ethnic cleansing, but he has received, a few months later, congratulations from the European Council President Charles Michel on his neither fair nor free re-election, in which he received 92% of the votes on a wave of massive repressions against journalists and activists. So there is no illusion to be had about what prevents Western powers from treating the Aliyev regime like they do the Lukashenko regime. It is economic and strategic interest, obviously. Azerbaijan benefits from a doubly advantageous position as a transit route for both Europe, with the middle corridor being an important trade route linking Europe to China and bypassing Russia, and very important for Russia too, as being the transit country of the north-south corridor connecting it to Iran, which is really key in the context of Western sanctions. Last January, only a few months after the ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh, the EU committed $10.8 billion of investment in the middle corridor. I leave to you the appreciation of this amount compared to the 270 million euros the EU pledged earlier this month in financial support to Armenia. Azerbaijan also benefits, as you know, from the unconditional support of Turkey, an important NATO ally in the region and Europe's guardian against migrants from the Middle East. So today, I don't want to lament about the unprincipled and hypocritical, some might say, policy of the EU leaders, about von der Leyen calling Aliyev's autocracy a reliable partner, deplore how unfair it is to Armenians to have enabled the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh by basically financing its military endeavors by buying gas, and continuing its economic cooperation with Azerbaijan. After 6 months of unrelentless massacre of besieged Palestinians in Gaza, in total impunity, and with the connivance of most of the Western world, it is hard to see how 150,000 Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh could ever wait in the balance of economic and strategic interests of either the Western powers or Russia, for this matter, because Russia, of course, was the only power on the ground that took the responsibility to guarantee the security of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians and eventually abandoned them. I would like to finish, however, by reminding that no matter how cynical the state of international politics is, Azerbaijan needs the EU much more than the EU would ever need Azerbaijan, and this is an objective fact. It is terribly afraid of becoming over-dependent on Russia and will do everything to avoid that. So I still believe in courageous leaders and individual agency in changing the course of history, and I would like to hope that there is still a chance that we could get away from the infamous cycle of immoral compromises. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Anita, for the amazing speech. Not only for the amazing speech, but also for sharing the stories of the people who sometimes their stories aren't shared. It's very difficult to stay composed. Not only just hearing these stories is, it reminds me, like, because they're not numbers. It reminds me of my own friends who were locked during the blockade. They stayed inside. Some of them even voluntarily, they want to go back to their families, knowing what might happen to them. And not only that, it reminds me of the time where, during the war itself, when Azerbaijan unleashed all those technologically advanced killing machines on the peaceful people of Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. Just you go to your local supermarket and there is your local cashier or the person who's working at anywhere else. You can see them with tears on their eyes. They're waiting every second. They're refreshing the news, just looking for updates. They don't know what's going to happen to their sons, to their families on the borders in Nagorno-Karabakh. It's very difficult to stay composed and to hear these stories. It just reminds me of my own friends there, and of course all the Armenians who had to suffer as well, because at the end of the day, these are not numbers; these are actual people who had to go through all of these things. But we move on. We go. I would like to continue with our next speaker, who's Vartan Parsekhian, discussing the ongoing Armenian genocide, addressing the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. Envoy Extraordinary and Minister Plenipotentiary, Vartan Parsekhian is an accomplished diplomat with over 25 years of experience working in pivotal international hubs such as Washington, D.C., Brussels, and Strasbourg. Born and raised in Stepanakert, native to Nagorno-Karabakh, he participated in the humanitarian relief and development programs in Artsakh with Médecins Sans Frontières and the International Committee of the Red Cross. I am honored to have him today, and from day one he was always helpful and he was committed to make this event possible, and without him this event wouldn't have also taken place. He helped out with everything, with logistics and of course his presence. We're lucky to have him here, and I would like to also just give the mic over to him. Thank you, Vartan.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you very much. Thank you. I thank the organizers, of course, Parur and your team, for organizing today's event. And would like to thank also Member of Parliament, Claire Daly. Please convey our thanks to her, and also our appreciation for her steadfast support. Let me also acknowledge previous speakers for their insights and quite eloquent remarks and sharing their personal stories. It's quite moving, of course, and we all share these sentiments. I'm glad to see many familiar faces in the room. We also had members of Parliament before, besides Madam Daly here in the room. Maybe some are still in the room. But I wish we were meeting in different circumstances, in better circumstances, but today's reality for Nagorno-Karabakh and its indigenous Armenian population is undeniably tragic. Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, is my homeland, the place where I was born and raised. So the loss of Artsakh is also a profound personal wound for me. For 7 months now, there are no more Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, for the first time in centuries. Rendered defenseless, they had no other choice but to escape from the inevitable ill treatment, arbitrary detentions, extrajudicial killings, all sorts of discrimination and terror of Azerbaijan and its genocidal regime, of which we have countless examples. The stage for today's grim reality for nearly 150,000 Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh was set back in 1915 when the Ottoman Turkey, the government decided to solve the Armenian question by killing and expelling the Armenians. The Turkish military intervention exported this Armenian genocide to the South Caucasus and provided support to the newly created country of Azerbaijan to establish a grip on the historic Armenian province of Artsakh, Karabakh, employing the same tactics as we heard already earlier today, the same tactics as in the Western Armenia. Thus, in September 1918, the Azerbaijani Ottoman joint forces captured the city of Shushi, installing an Azerbaijani administration. And during the next 2 years, they destroyed hundreds of Armenian villages and organized massacres of Armenians in Ganja and Baku. The Armenians of Karabakh, however, did not accept the Azerbaijani authority, also back then. So Baku coercion tactics continued and culminated in March of 1920, when the Azerbaijani troops massacred the Armenian population of Shushi, slaughtering some 20,000 Armenians, while forcing the rest out of their ancestral town. Turkey's role in Bolsheviks' decision to assign the historic Armenian territories such as Nakhichevan and Karabakh to Azerbaijan is also well documented, and we heard some information about that earlier. We're staying on the same subject, so some points will be repeated, but there will be also some new perspectives for you. Their role, the Turkish role, is well documented. So in Karabakh's case, the decision in Azerbaijan's favor was made under heavy influence of Joseph Stalin. So in 1921, to placate Turkey, the Soviets agreed to place Karabakh under the administrative control of Azerbaijan, disregarding the will of the region's majority Armenian population. When it comes to the period after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I will just quickly underline the strong democratic credentials of the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic and the full conformity with norms and principles of the international law of its aspirations for independence. Unfortunately, this young democracy did not garner the kind of international support and protection that it fully deserved. In the meantime, in 2020, exactly 100 years after the massacre of Shushi, Turkey returned to the South Caucasus, to Nagorno-Karabakh, and provided significant and multifaceted support to Azerbaijan, thus emboldening and enabling the latter to continue the Armenian genocide by killing and driving away the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. It is no coincidence that the Ottoman symbolism was in full display in Baku in 2020. Turkish and Azerbaijani troops marched in the so-called victory parade as the military band played the Ottoman anthems. Turkish President Erdogan also commemorated Ottoman leaders in his speech, declaring, and I quote, "Today may the souls of Nuri Pasha, Enver Pasha, and the brave soldiers of the Caucasus Islam Army be happy," end of quote, in reference to the Ottoman armies that invaded the South Caucasus 100 years ago. The Turkish role is important for understanding the direct connection between these two most tragic events in the modern Armenian history, the massacre and forced displacement of the Armenian population of Eastern Anatolia and South Caucasus in early 20th century, and the killings and forced displacement of the Armenian population from its ancestral lands in Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020 to 2023. What happened in Nagorno-Karabakh is a genocide. There is no shortage of independent reports testifying that what Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh have been facing from Azerbaijan is genocide. To this end, there is no doubt in the minds of experts in genocide prevention at the Lemkin Institute, the Genocide Watch, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, and among legal experts such as the former ICC Chief Prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo. In September of 2023, the UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocides expressed her alarm over the military escalation by Azerbaijan, underlining, I quote, "the risk of genocide and related atrocity crimes." So the Turkish-Azerbaijani one nation, two states coalition has not changed its goal since the early 20th century. The historic Armenian presence in the Armenian highlands, Eastern Anatolia, and Cilicia has been erased by the genocide perpetrators of the Ottoman Turkey. The same is happening in the South Caucasus. All regions and towns with the Armenian populations that were placed within the administrative boundaries of the Soviet Azerbaijan have now been wiped out of their ethnic Armenian inhabitants. with their cultural footprints systematically erased. Look at the fate of the Armenian communities in Nakhichevan, Sumgait, Baku, Ganja, Getashen, Shahumyan, and now the whole of Artsakh, whole of Nagorno-Karabakh. Not surprisingly, right after expelling the entire Armenian population, Azerbaijan reissued Nagorno-Karabakh's map with a street named after Enver Pasha, one of the architects of the Armenian genocide, invoked in Erdogan's speech in Baku. It would be naive and irresponsible to think that this infamous project of extermination of Armenians is over. Azerbaijan does not even conceal its objectives, now openly threatening the security of the Republic of Armenia. So what about the international response? While the civilized humanity is gradually recognizing and condemning the Armenian genocide, there is no acknowledgement of the ongoing nature of that vicious Turkish-Azerbaijani plan still underway in the South Caucasus. The Azerbaijani attack on Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020 and its blockade and the ensuing cleansing in 2023 triggered numerous statements from the UN bodies, members of the Security Council, the leadership of the organization, the UN Special Procedure mandate holders, the binding order of the International Court of Justice, several resolutions of the European Parliament, where we are meeting today, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, many national parliaments and governments, and finally, some urgent calls from international human rights organizations and genocide watchdogs. These efforts, regrettably, have not translated into an action to restrain Azerbaijan in its genocidal campaign against the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. At the UN Security Council meeting just 2 days after the Azerbaijani attack in September of last year, and echoing some of the previous speakers, the German foreign minister said, and I quote, "Baku broke its repeated assurances to refrain from the use of force, causing tremendous suffering to a population already in dire straits." Despite all of this, the effect on the ground for the most vulnerable and unprotected, the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, was zero. And the tens of thousands of women, children, and elderly did not want to be left at the mercy of an autocratic regime with a track record of entrenched hatred, Armenophobia, and genocidal actions. I would like briefly to speak about the approach of the international community to resolving the Nagorno-Karabakh issue before the war of 2020 and now after the forced displacement. Without going into details of the UN-mandated Nagorno-Karabakh peace process, I will just mention here some provisions of the consensus document issued at the level of heads of state of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chair countries, United States, Russia, and France, in 2009 and 2011, which largely remained on the negotiating table also for many years after. The document outlined the so-called basic principles, reflecting a reasonable compromise based on the Helsinki Final Act, principles of non-use of force, territorial integrity, and the equal rights and self-determination of peoples. When in 2020 Azerbaijan resorted to use of force, violating the first principle, and proudly reported that it has resolved the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict by restoring Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, one issue remained on the table, which is the equal rights and self-determination of people. The co-chairs of the Minsk Group also recognized this fact when they reiterated their consistent and unified position in favor of a negotiated, comprehensive, and sustainable settlement of all remaining core substantive issues, clearly referring to the right to self-determination, related to or resulting from the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Now, with the defunct OSCE Minsk Group, because of the differences among the co-chairs related to the war in Ukraine, what is the approach of the international actors, relevant international actors, on the Nagorno-Karabakh issue? Is there still a Nagorno-Karabakh issue? Has it been solved, just like the Armenian question of the Ottoman Empire some 100 years ago? Azerbaijan has changed the status quo by using military force, committing mass violations of human rights, crimes against humanity, violating multiple conventions, its membership obligations as a member of the United Nations Organization, the OSCE and the Council of Europe without any repercussion, political or legal, or economic. One slight hope finally came from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe in January of this year, when the Assembly did not ratify the credentials of the Azerbaijani delegation, citing among other reasons the ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh. For the past 2 years, the European Union assumed the role of the main mediator in the talks between Armenia and Azerbaijan, also emphasizing on the need to guarantee the rights and security of the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh, but it has done nothing so far to hold Azerbaijan accountable for grossly violating those same rights and heavily undermining the security of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. The promised serious consequences for Azerbaijan, also voiced by the US government, for Azerbaijan's use of force and ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh have yet to materialize. So, who remembers the Armenians of Artsakh now? If I were to paraphrase the infamous remark attributed to the mastermind of the Holocaust, who said, "Who after all speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians," as he was preparing his own atrocities? Who remembers the sufferings of the 150,000 Armenians, the peaceful people who in the span of 3 years were attacked several times by much superior military forces, with thousands killed, their bodies dishonored, many imprisoned, and the rest pushed out of their ancestral lands, their homes looted and destroyed, their churches desecrated, their cemeteries razed to the ground, and the lives of those who somehow survived this calamity in ruins, their future uncertain. Will the European Union go beyond mere statements to restore the rights of the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh? Who will be the voice of the voiceless, the suppressed and disadvantaged? Last December, a last group of elected mayors from over 100 municipalities in Nagorno-Karabakh was joined by dozens of political parties and civil organizations to appeal to the international community, including the European Union. In absence of leadership from the Nagorno-Karabakh government, which itself remains under duress, that's the voice of Artsakh. Over 200 entities signed that letter, representing a broad spectrum of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. Emphasizing on the right to a safe, dignified, and collective return, they ruled out any Azerbaijani jurisdiction and underlined the need for a multinational, UN-mandated peacekeeping force and internationally controlled Lachin corridor. The right to return, is also advocated by the Committee for the Protection of Fundamental Rights of the People of Artsakh, supported by the National Assembly of Nagorno-Karabakh. The committee recently stated that while the current situation in Nagorno-Karabakh does not favor a safe return, international law protects the right of forcibly displaced people to the territory of origin. This right is recognized as a customary norm of international law, the committee said, human rights law and international humanitarian law, and it's protected by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and numerous other international conventions and declarations. Hence, the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh are self-organizing to fight for their rights. Another such example is the recently formed Artsakh Union, a non-governmental organization which, in addition to the collective right to return, also prioritizes Azerbaijan's accountability for the gross violations of its international obligations, including non-implementation of the binding orders of the International Court of Justice, the return of hostages and prisoners, the protection of the Armenian cultural heritage of Nagorno-Karabakh, and the restoration of private property rights. It is not too late for the European Union and other major actors to do the right thing by ensuring the necessary conditions for the collective return of the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh to their ancestral homeland, thus reversing Azerbaijan's ethnic cleansing. Wrapping up my presentation just in a minute, let me quote Bjarni Johnson, an Irish member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, who said at the January plenary, I quote, "Today, this institution is choosing between Azerbaijan's credentials and its own credentials, because if we allow ourselves to be separated from our rules, our obligations, our commitments to protecting human rights, we collectively undermine and lose all credibility." End of quote. The leadership of the European Union should finally live up to its fundamental values, such as human rights, human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, as defined in the Treaty of Lisbon. These same values should guide the European Union's engagement universally, including on the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh, because human rights and the rule of law should not be sacrificed for some disgraceful economic and political calculations. In fact, the European Parliament, the moral compass of the Union, in my view, in its March 13 resolution, just over little over a month ago, provided a blueprint for the Commission to addressing the rights and security of the Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians. The European Union now needs to choose between the political expediency of siding with the autocratic Azerbaijan by turning a blind eye on the genocide of Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh and its own credibility. Let me finish on an optimistic note and hope that with our collective efforts, the human rights, as defined in the Treaty of Lisbon, will eventually prevail and justice will triumph. Thank you.
Thank you, Vartan, for your speech, also for coming here all the way from France. And we're fortunate enough, we're fortunate to have you here with us. And as you mentioned, although we talked about the Armenian genocide, and when we talk about Armenian genocide, we talk mainly about Western Armenia and Artsakh, Kilikia, where my ancestors come from, where my grandparents come from. However, we don't see any difference. Artsakh, Eastern Armenia, Western Armenia, it was artificially divided, not through our choice, through colonization. And in fact, the genocide, if you look at by genocide definition, it never really stopped. There were always violence against the Armenians. The violence never stopped. It didn't stop in 1991. It didn't stop a couple of months ago, and definitely not in 1915 or even before that. The Armenian diaspora existed for hundreds of years, and all the way to targeting the killing of Armenian and destruction of Armenian cities, and all of our ancestors who are Armenian. So any person, not only Armenian or any genocide survivor, but anyone who is passionate about human rights and wants to do the right thing should also be passionate about this topic, what's going on to the Armenians in Artsakh, because unfortunately no one else is talking about it, and more by time is passing, the less people are talking about it. So thank you again for your speech, and we're happy, we're fortunate enough to have you here. So before I move on, there were, as I mentioned earlier, there were questions during the registration forms, and we thought Vartan can answer some of them as well because of given your expertise and where you come from. Specifically, what step would be needed for reconciliation for the people of Artsakh, as we know, after everything went through?
Well, earlier today, some of you spoke about reconciliation after the Armenian genocide 100 years ago. So in Artsakh's case, it's too early to speak about that. And of course, the conditions should be there, and the main question, reconciliation with what, with whom. There is no reconciliation without justice. So rights should be restored. Accountability should be assured. And of course, Karabakh Armenians should return to their homeland. As for reconciliation, that's only when reconciliation can start. If we are talking about reconciliation or some sort of rapprochement, we were always for relationship, we were always for dialogue, but unfortunately, dialogue requires, not unfortunately, but as we know, dialogue requires at least two. So we should have a counterpart, but the counterpart was not there. The counterpart was preparing for aggression, for war, for continuation of this global project of annihilation of Armenians. So at this point, in the case of Artsakh, I think the focus should be on immediate needs, on what's urgently needed, is to deal with the needs on the ground and issues related to restoration of rights and reconciliation would be left for the future, hopefully not too distant future.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. Well, like you mentioned, the right to return, there wouldn't be even an Armenian diaspora if it wasn't for all these events, because no Armenian would have left, and especially the Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh, who I've never met anyone who loved, their homes as them. They wouldn't have left Artsakh and Nagorno-Karabakh if it wasn't for the ethnic cleansing and the genocide that happened to them. And I want to follow up with a second question, which is what can the EU do now to help the situation in regards to Nagorno-Karabakh and the right to return? Yes.
Representatives of the Commission to answer. But, as I said, the leadership on behalf of the European Parliament is there. So the roadmap, I would even say, if you look at the resolution adopted just a month ago, it's there. So there should be accountability. There should be some conditions for developing relations with Azerbaijan. Of course, geostrategic, economic interests are important. But the right balance should be found. So that's also important, not to lose your credibility, your moral guide in this situation. I think this situation is very clear. It's not like there's a lack of information on what happened. Everybody knows, the decision makers know that this is genocide just in front of their eyes. They should go back to their values. As I said in my speech, only there are the answers. So human rights, dignity of all individuals, and liberty, freedom. When these values are the guiding principles, then solutions can be found quite easily.
Thank you. Given that we have a tiny bit more time, I would like to ask if anyone has questions in the next 5 minutes, 4 minutes. So we'll accept a question and direct it to any one of our speakers. Please feel free to do so. And then afterwards, we have some tea and other drinks, and I invite you there, and then maybe we can talk also ourselves personally. Yes, please.
Hi, it's just for the sake of opening the discussion and starting the discussion. Thank you very much for all the speeches, particularly on the current situation. of the refugees in Karabakh. I wanted to point out, going back a little bit in time, I wanted to point out that as far as I know, the European Commission, unlike the European Parliament, doesn't talk about the Armenian genocide. This is admittedly until 3 years ago. I haven't checked again in the last few years, but I don't think the situation has changed. And of course, this is completely anecdotal compared to the things we've been discussing. But I think it was already a very powerful symbol of something wrong in the depths of the European institutions already then. And I think it would be important for us to try and understand why. Why, after virtually every important country in Europe has recognized the genocide at all levels, still now, and of course long after the European Parliament recognized the genocide, why the European Commission doesn't even use the word? That was my question.
Thank you. What do you think? Yeah. Yeah. As I said, we're missing someone from the European Commission here. But, you know, again, it all comes to what I call disgraceful economic and political calculations. It's shameful, of course, and then it perpetuates, as it was mentioned here, the cycle of violence and genocide. Going back, if you don't mind, to the earlier question, of course there is this, what the EU can do right now. Of course, try to help with the needs, immediate needs of those displaced in Nagorno-Karabakh, help to restore their rights. And you can do it different ways, including by imposing sanctions. So by not tolerating the kind of behavior that Azerbaijan is portraying, a rogue behavior, unbecoming, for instance, for a member of the Council of Europe. And I hope what has started in the Parliamentary Assembly will be continued. So eventually we'll have some political and legal repercussions for Azerbaijan. So next time we'll invite probably somebody from the Commission and ask them. But a lot depends, of course. There are things to do, of course, for everybody to bring justice to those who suffered and 100 years ago, and to restore those rights, whatever is possible, and to deal with the most recent atrocities. I think if we focus on that, that will be a way also to serve justice to what happened 100 years ago to Armenians.
With your permission, can I add something to it?
Of course, yeah.
Yes. So, I'm sorry, my microphone is a little bit far. Yeah, it's fine. So, coming back to the question about what the EU can do, when we're speaking about Armenian genocide, it's the commemoration, it's raising awareness. But when we are speaking about the persisting issue that permeate today's politics of the South Caucasus region, mainly the hundreds of thousands of refugees of Nagorno-Karabakh and the belligerent rhetoric of Azerbaijan, EU can come up with a very specific strategy of putting concrete deadlines and concrete actions as repercussions to the actions of Azerbaijan. If Azerbaijan is continuing its belligerent rhetoric, if continuing its warmongering and other malicious acts towards Armenia and Armenians of the region, EU should have concrete measures to address those, and also set concrete specific deadlines for Azerbaijan. If they do not support and do not secure the return of Armenians to Nagorno-Karabakh, safe and secure return, this will happen. Very specific economic and political repercussions will follow. If they do not stop their warmongering and territorial claims against Armenia, then political and economic steps will follow. So this is something that EU should be mindful of, and EU has all the right tools in their toolbox to address this issue. It's a matter of political will, and it's a matter of security of the Southern Caucasus, and in my opinion, it is completely in the purview of the European Union to follow up these issues. So this is an added opinion, if it would have any added value for you.
Thank you for the added value. It was definitely added value. So since we're short on time, we have one more question. Okay, let's do one last question, a quick question. So please go ahead.
Ես ֆրանսերենով պիտի հարցնեմ, բարեկամը պիտի թարգմանի. On a eu un cours d'histoire. On a eu un cours d'histoire et de l'histoire ce soir en toute objectivité et on tire des leçons de l'histoire. Oh.
You must stop it here. You must.
Ah oui.
So we had a history lesson tonight, and we need to drive lessons from these lessons.
Ce qui s'est passé à la fin du 19e et début du 20e siècle, nous venons d'entendre, et ça s'est passé récemment. Exactement la même chose, je m'exprime.
So, do you understand French, by the way?
I don't, but I think most people do, so there's no need to translate.
So what we heard about 19th century, what happened again a few months ago, I mean, these last few years.
Il y a les responsables, les coupables du génocide, il y a aussi les complices. Le génocide 1915. Les complices directs et indirects, les directs des peuples et des pays qui ont participé, et la complicité dans le silence des nations.
There were the ones who were guilty and the ones who helped them, sometimes only with the silence of the nations.
Le premier génocide, c'est la Turquie qui est coupable. Et ce qui s'est passé récemment, c'est l'État azerbaïdjan.
So first genocide is Turkey who was guilty, and the last one was Azerbaijan.
J'ai l'impression, actuellement, aujourd'hui, en vous entendant, en tout ce qui se passe dans la politique actuelle, me retrouver à la fin du 19e, début du 20e siècle.
I've got the impression we are 1 century back and live the same thing as the end of the 19th century.
L'Azerbaïdjan est coupable et la communauté internationale, l'Europe avec, est complice dans le silence.
So we have one state guilty, Azerbaijan, now, and the international community remains silent.
Je comprends parfaitement que l'Europe est enivrée par le pétrole russe via Azerbaïdjan.
So Europe benefits from Russian oil via Azerbaijan, and it's getting mad with it.
L'Europe est anesthésiée, est dans l'amnésie totale et charmée par cette politique d'Azerbaïdjan.
So Europe is charmed by this and, doesn't react because of this Azerbaijan policy.
À côté de moi, mon ami, il a un journal, c'est marqué « Tragédie et l'espérance ». Qu'est-ce qu'on peut espérer aujourd'hui avec l'Europe et la communauté internationale? C'est le peuple d'Artsakh qui parle.
So Armenia lives again tragedy, but lives as usual in hope. So what can we hope today from the international community?
Je me pose la question, je termine, où sont les États et les pays humanistes? Comment ils se manifestent dans cet état de fait? Je pose la question, je n'attends pas les réponses directement par vous, mais c'est une question qu'on doit réfléchir.
And the last question is, where are now the states who are focusing or worrying about humanist views?
So if you can answer the question in 1 or 2 sentences, it would be very nice. I think if Vartan or...
Actually, I wanted to...
Oh, given the timing we have, I think we can answer very short.
Cher Père Zatik, on pose la même question. Malheureusement, pas de réponse à ce moment. Yeah, I can do it in English, but I wanted to commend the translator. Yeah, it's an art to, translate long sentences into short and still convey the meaning. That was a good one. But նույն հարցեր ունենք հայերեն ասեցի, we have the same questions. We have the same questions. So far, no answers. And I mean, first of all, the people of Karabakh, the people of Artsakh, who pinned their hopes to humanity. And I think Anita mentioned the rallies in Stepanakert with tens of thousands of people holding posters, appealing the international community, and their hopes did not materialize. So these questions are still lingering, and it requires advocacy, it requires work, and it requires awakening. And hopefully these questions will be answered, and this answer will satisfy the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, and the most desired satisfaction will be going back to our homeland as owners of our land, as it should be. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I would like to point out as well that Hayr Zadik was also very helpful, and I want to thank him for his question, but also for coming here today and helping us out with everything. I want to thank out every single speaker and every single person who helped organize this event. Without you guys, it wouldn't have been possible. And the people in Armenia and in the diaspora who again helped out. And thank you for everyone who came here. And if you have any more questions, please feel free to ask us at the end. We're going to be here. So thank you again.